go. What do you guys think?
Hi, Anna.
Okay. So, good evening or good morning, everyone from Athens, depending on where you are in the world. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the organizing team of the Hellenic Alumni Association of Greece to our virtual event here today, entitled Higher Education in the Post-COVID Era, a View of the Transformation Ahead, featuring Lena Papalexopoulou, who is a member of the Tufts International Board of Advisors and is also a Tufts parent. We can see her, one of her children here, a Tufts enthusiast and a dear friend and supporter of the Greek chapter here in Athens. Tufts alumni in Greece are active here more than 20 years, and we count approximately 300 members from all the schools of the university: engineering, liberal arts, dental school, and Fletcher. And we hold events on a yearly basis. We usually host them in the Karamanlis Foundation, and with the help, of course, from the university and Jerry in particular. Um, and we also help with interviewing prospect students for the university, and we hold various roles in the alumni council. So, virtual versus actual events. Virtual events have some advantages, and one of which is that we are able to see friends from the international Tufts community, and also they are easier in the logistics, so we can also do them more frequently. So with this, I would like to introduce you to my colleague and the vice president of the Greek alumni chapter, Eugenia Vandoros, who is going to introduce and talk about the bio of Lena. Thank you again for joining. If you are not included in the Tufts mailing list for the Greek chapter, I will put my email in the show notes. Enjoy this interesting conversation. Eugenia, all yours.
Thank you, George. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many faces from all over the world. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Lena, like George said, a member of the Tufts Board of International Advisors and a proud jumbo mother to Anna, who is graduating in May. Lena is the vice president of Desmos, a non-profit foundation, which is a hub for charitable giving. And during the last decade, Lena has devoted herself to serving the common good, focusing on education and engagement. In October 2019, she was appointed to Repositioning Greece, a team which advises the Prime Minister of Greece on the country's image and strategic planning. She is also an active collaborator with the Ministry of Education in Greece and a passionate believer in education as a force for a better future. This led her to create and implement the I Care and Act program that guides teachers and students to create volunteer and active citizenship experiences inside and outside of the classroom, and to help them create a collective mentality of civic engagement. As I know that you have all registered to hear Lena speak and not myself, I will keep the introduction brief, and I will now pass the floor over to her.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. It's lovely to be in good company, even though virtually. And I thank you for your kind introduction. With your permission, I'd like to share my screen and maybe walk you through a presentation, and then we will be back. Let me just see. Are you all right now seeing a screen? Okay, wonderful. So before I start my presentation, I would like to make a couple of very quick disclaimers. Firstly, the views that I present are my own, and they stem from my involvement with higher education institutions, and they do not necessarily reflect those of the Tufts International Board of Advisors, on which I sit. The second one is that the topic that is chosen is way too vast, and too complex to do it justice within the 30 minutes of our time. So there are many other topics that I will not touch upon. I have chosen what I think is important and could be of interest to you. And lastly, I've chosen to focus on pretty much the Anglo world, primarily the US or the OECD. Aha, and I cannot go on to my next slide. That's starting off very well. Okay, let me try to.
If you
That
try
didn't-
hitting escape,
I did, but it's okay. I can try it again and see if it works. I apologize for this delay. There we go. It's working this time. So why this topic? Those of you who know me know that I'm a passionate believer in education. I fundamentally believe that the quality and reach of our education is the foundation of our future. And right now, the system of higher education, the way we know it, is entering an era of transformational change. The sooner we realize.
Sorry to interrupt. We're unable to see the screen at the moment.
You are unable to see the
Yes.
screen.
Yes.
Okay, that's not good. Are you able to see the screen now? No, you're still not able to see the screen? Okay, let's try again.
yep,
Yeah.
now we see it.
Can you see a screen now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, we'll get there, guys, eventually. So the better off we'll be when we actually are able to realize what the changes in education are. Now, I would like to start with defining a starting point before we talk about the changes that are about to come. What is the starting point that we have? Well, I think everybody is kind of in agreement that we're at the end of a golden era. The golden era of higher education, there's no consensus really when it started. Some say at the end of World War II, some say 60s, 70s, or even 90s, but I think there's pretty much a consensus on when it's stopping, and it's pretty much now. Now, in this era, there was extraordinary growth that is driven by prosperity. In this period, actually, education grew by a factor of 6 within the years of 2013, while population only grew by 1.9. This extraordinary growth was driven by economic prosperity, by growing demand for students, not just domestically, but also internationally, and they're much better paying, as you know, government backing that took many forms, and except for all these tangible things, there was also a very big intangible, which was that there was social consensus on the value of higher education. As a result, an elite system morphed into a high participation one, many would say even a mass participation one in most countries. Today, 1 out of 3 youths globally and 3 out of 4 in the US or Europe enroll in colleges. As a matter of fact, the percentage of youth enrolled in universities grew from 16% in 95 to 38% in 2019. There's also prestige and soft power associated with degrees. And something that is extremely important is that the exchange of people and ideas internationally has been facilitated. And I cannot go to my next slide again. Jerry? Oh, there we go. Maybe it just takes some time. Okay. Now, it would be unfair to speculate and to say that it is COVID that actually brought about the end of the golden era. The truth is that the higher education community actually missed the mark on a number of important issues even before the pandemic struck. There's a diminishing correlation between societal needs and students' qualifications. We know that their unemployment is growing, while at the same time, there are unstaffed jobs with many companies. A very important point is that there's a perceived decreasing return on education as tuition fees and student debt are rising. So the value for money for education is decreasing. That is something that is really crucial. If you look at the OECD and what they have actually published, they say that more than 60% of those asked think that the same degree today is worth a lot less than one it did 10 years ago. If you look at the cost of education in the past 20 years in the OECD countries, it's almost doubled. And if one tries to hone in the US specifically, we see that student debt has actually grown by a factor of 5 within a matter of just 7 years. In 2013, student debt in the US was $330 billion. Today, it's a whopping $1.7 trillion. There are 43 million people still owing money for their education. That is more than 50% of what the world, the planet, spends on education. It's not something that's sustainable. In addition, the system's inability to scale up under the current face-to-face model is an issue, and several universities were not able to keep up pace with the digital revolution. Finally, there's diminishing social consensus, especially in the US and the UK, on the value of universities, and that is resulting in shrinking government support. So if that wasn't all enough, then came COVID. You all know what happened during COVID: disruption, forced change, social distancing, empty campuses, costs, legal issues, and uncertainty, all these issues, but obviously an opportunity to affect long overdue changes. So without any further ado, let's see what these changes will be. Before talking about the changes that I really want to talk about, I really should mention the most obvious one. The most obvious one is that there's going to be a heck of a lot of financial stress. The higher education sector will be dealt a significant blow. It's already being dealt a significant blow. Enrollment revenue will drop as a whole in the US. Last year, it was down 4%. If you take the Trump administration into consideration, international revenue in the US, meaning international students, was down 43%. But I will be very happy to admit that that is not the same across the border. Some institutions will fare better than others. Tufts is faring better, maybe because of the weighting of standardized testing actually saw an increase in applications. But for the most majority of universities, the revenue will drop. At the same time, practically for every university, the operating expenses, whether they're new operating expenses such as IT and all the health related ones, or whether they're the existing operating expenses such as the dorm and dining where the density is a lot lower, all of those will surge. At the same time, government funding is already decreasing and will decrease further, and several donors that support education will have less to donate. So there's a lot of financial distress, and the financial distress will affect the functioning, the academic curricula, the quality of education, and maybe even the viability of universities. Now, I was reading an article the other day by John Kroger. John Kroger, for those of you who may not recall, is the was the president rather of Reed College for many years, and I think he's the chief learning officer. There's such a thing of the U.S. Navy now. He was saying that he expects approximately 750 to 1,000 colleges in the US to go bust, to go under before COVID is over. That is about 25% of in-person colleges in the US. I don't share that doom and gloom view. I think that some will go under. I don't think there'll be that many, but some will. I also think that it's worthwhile mentioning that even though most people think that the online universities or education providers will do better, I don't think that that will necessarily be the case. I think there will be a lot of attrition there too. I do not seem to be able to answer a very simple question. Why would anybody pay money to watch, take a course, to watch a course from a no-name university online, when actually a lot of top-notch universities are offering those courses for free online? So everything will change financially. And I think as the issues persist, universities will need to devise new sustainable financial models. Now let's go to change number 2. We are looking at a symbiosis of in-person and online learning from now on. No more just in-person, no more just online. It's going to be two, but both of them together. It's going to be a hybrid model. You know that in 2019, before COVID hit, in our type of colleges, practically all teaching was in person. Then you see in the diagram during the COVID era, we went to practically all online. I think that as of next September, we're going to see in-person overtaking again. And many of us are longing to go back and be in person on campuses. But at the end, when all of this is over, when we're at the tail end of this pandemic, I think we're going to settle in a very hybrid form. Okay, it's going to be symbiosis from now on, and it's going to be a symbiosis from now on because both forms of teaching and education are extremely important. In person is crucial. We cannot let go of in person, and it's not going to die after COVID. And it's very important because it allows us to connect with people, to connect with professors, with institutions, with fellow students. It allows us to feel, which is very important, and to build relationships. You know, Aristotle had said that people actually educating, he said that educating the mind without educating the heart is not educating at all, which is actually very, very true. Maya Angelou said that people will forget how you make them, will forget what you say, will forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. There's nothing like feeling in order to be able to teach someone. And it's very hard to do that online. So in person is here to stay. On the other hand, online is extremely important too. It allows us to expand our student base. It allows us to expand reach, provide flexibility, shrink, even annihilate costs. It can be borderless, and it does something very important, which is increase the inclusivity and democratization of education. So expect, include, from now on a debate, including a questioning of the traditional in-person Anglo model that we are used to. Expect different institutions will choose different answers. Not the same model will be okay for everybody. It's not one size fit all. And expect a very different competition map, as the same universities will be competing to academic institutions that will use very different models in very different regions of the world. Now, the other thing that I think is going to change, the third most important change, is a shift from knowledge-based learning to soft skills. This is something that we have, heard about before. It's something that's been kind of in the news for the past 10 years, but it hasn't really kicked off. And I think it's going to pick up a lot of space. We won't be surprised to hear that employers are looking primarily for things that university do not directly teach. They're looking for social skills, emotional intelligence, teamwork, communication, and time management. We may not be surprised either to hear that even employees are, willing to upskill and retrain to maintain their employability by more than 8 out of 10, according to PwC. Where we may be a little bit more surprised is to hear that even educators are beginning to be in the same wavelength. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit, you see, for example, that 79% of educators believe that soft skills are as important as knowledge is, that 76% of students benefit from learning outside of formal lectures, and that learning should take place outside classrooms. I think nobody put it better or more convincingly than the head of PISA for the OECD, who said that the world economy no longer pays you for what you know. Google knows everything. The world economy pays you for what you can do with what you know. Now, at the World Economic Forum, they figured that out a long time ago. So about 5 or 6 years ago, they did a meta-study analysis where they tried to find out what are the skills that are necessary for success in the 21st century. And basically, where they panned out with all these scientists studying this is that education today is focused largely on knowledge acquisition, and it's focused on knowledge acquisition through what are called foundational literacies, which would be the classics, literacy, numeracy, scientific literacy. And then we added information and communication and technology, literacy, financial literacy, cultural and civic literacy. But that is not enough anymore. We have to move towards competencies. And they define 4 major competencies. One would be critical thinking and problem solving. The other one would be creativity, which is the ways to solve problems, communication and collaboration. And even that is not enough. What is really needed is character qualities. Are you curious enough to find out how to overcome an issue or solve a problem? Do you take initiative to go and solve it? How much do you persist? Do you give up in the beginning and not solve it? What is your adaptability, leadership, socially, and cultural awareness? So basically, if I had to sum this up in my own words, it would be very loosely from anything that a machine can do to anything that is uniquely human. So the purpose of education will shift from helping students learn information to teaching students how to collect information, how to interpret, how to apply, how to use information. My only question is, will we go fast enough? And before we move from soft skills, let me just give you one example. I'm not sure how many of you would be familiar with edX. edX is a digital platform of free, high quality education for all. It's probably the biggest one in the world. Their vision is something that speaks to my heart. It warms up my heart. Their vision is to create a world where every learner can access education to unlock their potential without the barriers of cost and without the barrier of location. Now, two institutions are the founding partners, and they are MIT and Harvard. And right now, it's run by 6 institutions along with 165 partners. And the 6 institutions are, except for MIT and Harvard, Oxford and Cambridge in the UK, and Google and Amazon that's powering up this whole endeavor. They have more than 110 million enrollments from 370 million students in 196 countries. Heck, I didn't know that there were 196 countries. I thought there were 194. Maybe there's Southwest North Korea or something that I was unaware of. So it's a huge effort. And I had the opportunity actually recently to meet Anant Agarwal. Anant Agarwal is the founder and CEO of edX, who's a professor at MIT. And in a presentation that he did, he used a table that you can see there where he has the top 15 courses. They have 3,000 to 4,000, depending on how you define them, courses at edX. And up until COVID hit, there were no courses on soft skills. Within a matter of a few months, before the end of last year, 3 out of the top 10 courses at TEDx were on soft skills. And right now, the 3rd most popular course is empathy and emotional intelligence. Okay, change number 4. I think we're going to move from a traditional approach, which is getting a big lump of education at the end of your high school years and before you start your career, towards something that is much more student-centric, more customer-centric. An approach that I would like to call ed units. Now, please forgive me. I know that ed units is not a legit term. It doesn't exist. Don't try to look it up. But it's my mental note when I read things. It's education units. Okay, we're going to buy education units, and some people will call them independent courses, and others would call them micro credentials, and others call them modules, and others will call them certificates or diplomas. It doesn't really matter what you call them. They're educational units, right? So a person, a learner, may want to take an educational unit just because they have the time, or because they have the need, or because that's not when they have the money, or just because they have the desire. So they may choose a course in order to upskill for their current job, or they may choose it in order to retrain for a different job, or because they're unemployed, or because they're furloughed, or because they want to learn more, or just to substitute the teaching that they're currently getting. It's whatever they want. Now, these ed units, I think, will be stackable, not necessarily stacked. You won't need to stack them, but they'll be stackable in the sense that you can take 3 courses that'll add up to a certificate, or 3 certificates that'll add up to a degree, and so on. But you won't need to do it that way. You can just pick here and there, or you can do your traditional bachelor's or master's. That's not going to waste. It's still going to be there. It's still going to be prevalent, and then add a few courses. But you can advance through any of those ways. You will not have to go the way we have now, getting a big lump of education in order to have your advancement. And all of this leads into lifelong education. I fundamentally believe that from now on, education will become a lifelong service. So we should expect older students, and we may not even call them students, we may call them learners from now on. And an increased number of people will want to integrate learning into their lives. Think about it, as opposed to integrating their lives into learning, as opposed to integrating their lives into a degree and interrupting their lives for immersive full-time experience. Change number 5 will be from university to diversity. You think that now we have diverse colleges and universities? I think if we wait 5 years or 10 years, we will think, looking back, that what we have now is uniform and not diverse as we believe. Education providers will change as more and more education is provided by information technology virtually. We should expect technology companies to enter the market, and they may do so alone, or may they do so in partnerships with other universities that currently exist. So you will have the traditional universities, the new ones will have corporate education providers, and we will have partnerships. We will have, different, but wouldn't be surprised if we saw one day, a university ABC powered by Google. Yeah, could happen. We'll have different areas of focus and niche development as universities try to provide something that is different, have a unique selling point so they can attract more students and survive. Now, all these new content and new delivery methods, we'll have live, we'll have virtual, augmented reality, synchronous, asynchronous, there's all these methods, will create the need for a new instructor. And in all of the readings I did, and I both for the boards on which I serve for universities and in preparation of this talk, I didn't see the fair do. People didn't touch about that. Everybody was talking about the methods and the institutions that provide, but nobody was paying attention to instructors. And I think we need to pay a lot more attention to instructors. I think there's going to be a change there. For example, if you see many more courses that are going to be focusing on soft skills, okay? And you want to provide an experiential experience to your students, what would you choose a PhD, a traditional PhD that spent years researching in a library, and not somebody who's much more hands-on and can convey that information better? So I think we'll be looking at a new form of instructor. But if we want to take it a step further, we can look into what others such as De La Roca says. De La Roca is the assistant provost at BU, and some of you may have spotted him at the Singularity Summit a couple of months back. Now, De La Roca said this whole theory how we're not going to have instructors from now on, that we're going to have teams. Okay, so it says that faculty will become just a role in a larger team. Faculty will bring domain knowledge, but equally important to effective education, a process and experience design. So De La Roca expects to have a team where, of course, you're going to have your professor who will know the material, but then you will also have an e-learning designer, technology specialist, a content coach, a social director, and a managing correspondent, which will be kind of like the project manager that is bringing everything together. So teaching will become a team process where trained professionals will apply the finding of science of learning to improve the experience of students. Okay, so in basically, to sum it up, in a world where knowledge is ubiquitous, content expertise will become less important, and process and experience in design is going to become more important. And the final point is the use of AI, artificial intelligence. Now, that's another topic where we can talk for a few hours, and obviously we don't have the time, but I just want to mention it, that the use of artificial intelligence powered learning platforms is already a fact. It's not like it will start happening. We had a presentation at the International Board of Advisors at Tufts where the dean of the engineering school, Ku, that's his name, was explaining how all the research that is being done at Tufts on artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence could be the key in scaling up personalized learning, which is one of the weakest points of our current face-to-face system. A lot of us are watching out the big example that's happening at Georgia Tech. They started about 4 or 5 years ago, a big experiment where they're actually using bots, smart bots, as TAs, as teaching assistants. And the experiment apparently is going pretty well, and they're going to roll that out. They're in their experiment. Their bots are being powered by IBM. So my last slide of changes, I think that we're going to see a larger number of learners, irrespective of their means and location. They will have access to online education. So that will result in increased globalization and greater diversity and inclusion, which is a theme that we all want to promote. However, I think it is not just possible. I think it is likely, and personally, I consider it very unfortunate, that the education market is going to split into sectors, into segments, okay? And on one hand, you will have few high quality academic institutions that will continue offering the traditional and mostly face-to-face educations. And some universities will, promote their physical campus experience as part of their value proposition. And if they have a strong enough brand name, I think that they'll be able to pull it off. But I'm afraid those will be the minority. I think that within a decade or so, we will have more virtual hybrid part-time education providers, and they will be of lower quality of education. And in this case, the privileged, the wealthy, and sometimes the gifted, if they are lucky enough to get scholarships, will have access to the former, while the latter will not. And they will benefit disproportionately in education, and that will only fuel inequalities, which I think is one of the biggest plagues of today. So, to sum it all up, conclusions for universities. There's a major transformation on the way. It's already happening. It is time to reflect, to decide, and to act. And universities will have two options: to optimize and take it step by step, or to radically transform. I don't think that inertia is an option. And I think inertia is not an option in the sense that as the education market is changing and transforming in such fundamental ways, even if an institution opts not to change, its relative position within the market will. So institutions can benefit, and in some cases, I would say even survive, by being proactive. And they can proactively review mission, strategy, and tactics. And that has to be done in that order. First, the mission, where we want to go, then strategy, then tactics. Adopting optimal operating model, developing the appropriate programming for that model, choosing suitable methods, tools, and technology, establishing collaborations when they need to establish collaborations, and then taking very difficult decisions where teaching staff are concerned, as I mentioned a little bit before. How do you right size? How do you hire when you need to let go of some people? How do you reskill? How do you deal with remuneration and tenure? How do you build teaching teams? How can you be fair to your loyal teaching staff while at the same time make sure that you provide your students with the new skills that are most pertinent to them? And then all of that needs to be communicated. Now, some people would ask, which universities are going to fare better given all of this? Well, I think it's quite easy to answer that, but we start from the obvious one again: those who have healthy finances and a generous endowment, but even more than a generous endowment, strong fundraising capabilities in order to keep on raising more, a strong brand or a very clear niche, that definitely will help. But very important will be flexible DNA. If you're bogged down with bureaucracy, you're not going to be able to adapt as quickly. So you have to be very, very swift at all levels to hone in on adaptability. But if I had to pick just one factor, that would be the most important one in order to predict how universities will fare, I think it would be leadership. Leadership in times of change is more important than any other time. And I think you need visionary leaders who can see what's coming next. Bold, that means to be able to take the brave decisions, because some of them will not be pleasant for a lot of people. Proactive, not wait to see what happens, but actually take a decision and go ahead and do what needs to be done. And for example, if we're moving towards lifelong learning, why not start a loyalty program so that people can come back in 10 years and 20 years when they want to get additional ed units that we were saying before? And finally, unifying. unifying leadership, because all of these transitions cannot be done solely by one person. It will take a team. And my last slide, so that I don't keep you much longer, there are some conclusions for society as a whole. Reality check: the transformation is already begun, and it's going to be towards a much more value-driven, lifelong service through digitalization, soft skills, educational units, and it's already happening. There's no going back. The timing, I think that the pace will be fast, but it's not going to be fast enough because there's some resistance to the system. The system is very hierarchical and brand dominated, and it's been that way for decades. Some would even say for centuries. And because there's no real ways yet of how to measure the outcomes of what we want. I mean, how do you measure soft skills or competencies, for example, or character skills? So timing will be fast, but not as fast as it should be. And then finally, in terms of risks and gains, there are three most important risks that I've chosen to mention: decreased quality of education and lower value attributed to education and educators as a whole. Those are bad enough, but potentially with a lot of work that could be mitigated. The one that will be a lot harder to mitigate and is even more dangerous is that there will be greater inequality within the educational system, and the greater inequality within the educational system will result in not bridging divides, but increasing divides and increasing inequality within society. Finally, in terms of gains, and I put the gains after the rest so we can end on a positive note, we will have the widespread accessibility to education. So there will be greater diversity, greater inclusion, and then of course there will be an increased correlation between the educational offerings and what society really needs. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. And we're open to any questions that any of you may have, or any comments or anything that you would like to share. Thank you very much for your patience.
Well, thank you so much for such a fascinating insight into how you see the future of education going. If anyone has any questions, if you want to raise your hand, I believe, where's Jabari? Jabari might be able to help me better. Yes. Where?
Or you can raise your hand physically.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, feel free to either physically raise your hand, but there is an option for you to select raise your hand if you go to the participants tab. And for those of you who are on the call, if you look at the more section, there's a little pop out under the ellipsis that you can click to raise your hand as well. But we have a first question if you want to begin the Q&A, Eugenia.
Vicky, I believe you raised your hand.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, and I'm wondering, you're also a Tufts parent. What should Tufts do, and how should it position itself in the future?
That is absolutely a great and very pertinent question. Tufts, from the studies that I have done and from the interaction that I have, Tufts is not the only academic institution whose board I sit on, is very, very proactive. Tufts has exactly the type of leadership that I described before. That's why I think, even though it sounds like an oxymoron, I'm realistically optimistic about Tufts, because it has precisely that leadership. It is right now in the process of producing a white paper on the future of education. I was very keen on reading it, but they didn't let me read it. It's not ready yet. But they're working exactly like that. President Tony Monaco has asked for it, and the deans are working on it. And in the white paper on the future of education, we'll see exactly what these trends are. They, as I said, they may agree or disagree with the ones that I pointed out, but that's not just going to be a white paper. They'll actually have recommendation on what needs to be done afterwards. So I think they're being very, very proactive, but Tufts is very serious about inclusion, about diversity, about expanding reach. And they have been extremely proactive and efficient about switching to online and supplementing in person with online, while at the same time, it's been one of the first universities in Massachusetts, for sure, to bring back some in-person teaching. So it's going to be very, very difficult to make those choices. But Tufts is as top of the game as any university that I know of. So you should be proud to be part of Tufts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Anna, do you want to give your mom the next question?
Yes, Mom, I love the presentation.
Okay, give me an easy one, Anna. Don't make it difficult.
No, that was the fun in that. So I love your idea about the existence of these stackable educational modules, so that they can lead to kind of more of a lifelong education for those, especially who can't afford to take 4 years off right out of high school at the opportunity cost of getting a job. And because you talked a lot about also the inequalities kind of within the educational system, I wanted to ask how you see this model of education with the modular units affecting those inequalities or ameliorating them in a sense.
Well, I think it's a good question, and it's not that easy. It's a tough one because it'll do both. I think it will decrease the problem that we have right now with inequalities, in the sense that it'll be available. Educational units will be available to many more people than before. So if there's a young lady in a small little village in Ghana, or a 9-year-old grandpa somewhere in Pakistan, or anything, that they would not have had access to information, to education otherwise, or even in our home countries, to be honest, they will have access to educational units. And more universities are putting out such courses for free. For example, edX, it's Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, and MIT behind it, and they're giving all of that information for free. So in that sense, it'll decrease inequalities. The fear, as I mentioned before, is that the quality may be different in person to online. And as many people will take a lot of these stackable units online because they will not be able to take them in person. Because, for example, you may be working and you may have a full-time job, you know that you may be fired, so you're looking for your next job, so you're retraining. You can't really do it full-time because you're working already. You have to do it online at night. So therefore, the quality may not be the same. So it's both. I would like to believe that it's mostly positive and not negative, that the positive outweighs the negative.
Thank you. Panos, would you like to?
Sure. Lena, thank you very much for this thrilling presentation. I come a little bit down the road from the design school at Harvard, and now I teach at the university, the Technical University of Crete in Chania. So I have many points I wanted to discuss, but I really loved your slide about the university going versus diversity, and that the idea that professors do not hold the chair anymore, and they are mostly facilitators. They don't hold the knowledge anymore, and we see that already happening in our design classes. We tend to have students form teams and go ahead with each other instead of us giving them what we consider as knowledge. But I wanted to focus more on your slide about timing, how fast all these things can happen. Unfortunately, we all know that COVID has been an accelerator, so it is a way to make things happen more quickly, but the system is very resistant, as you said. So from your experience, how do you think, what parameters can make this thing go faster without falling in the trap of the elites who have the means going ahead and making this big distance between who follows? How can we make things happen more quickly without falling in the trap of making a lead?
That is a brilliant question. Thank you very much, Dr. Parthenios. When I first was approached by Tufts and I started making my presentation, I wasn't talking about a transformation and a transformative change. I was talking about disruption and revolution. And then I'm like, wait a minute, it can't happen that quickly. Take it down a notch. So it's exactly where you're coming from. There's so many barriers that it won't go as fast. It'll be a transformation. It's not going to be a disruption or an explosion. How can it go faster? I think it can go faster if the universities and the professors, the educators themselves, believe that it should go ahead and they will espouse the changes. Because the biggest we'll find ways of measuring competencies, and we'll find ways of measuring skills and so on, and other barriers will stop. But what's stopping the speed to make it that fast is basically the institutions themselves, the very strong brand names, the system of tenure in the Anglo-Saxon world specifically, and the administrations of the universities. So the only way that I see to speed it up is to co-opt the academic institutions themselves and to try to convince, and it's one of the reasons why I'm talking about this, with such passion, and convince educators that this is change that's coming, so you might as well embrace it. If a PhD professor who's been in a library for 20 years, his knowledge may not be as relevant because we can Google everything a lot easier, she or he may need to think of, how do I transform it? He or she has the experience of how to deal with the students, of how to connect with the students, of how to transmit this knowledge, which is so important. So if they embrace the change of cooperating, of using the new technologies, of using new methods, of not being afraid of being powered by Google, that's going to go a lot faster. Oxford did an experiment like that. There was a great interview by the provost there, where they were saying that they were expecting when COVID started to be able to move online the big lectures. But they didn't expect to be able to move the one-on-one teaching assistantships online. Said, okay, we'll put our big lectures, best lectures online. And then they did that and they tried it out for the whole year. And at the end, they said, this doesn't work out because they couldn't get the connection with the students in the lecture. And they ended up reversing what they had planned to do in the beginning. And now they're going to try to keep the big lectures in person and do the small face-to-face teaching assistantships with bots. Pretty much what Georgia Tech was doing. I'm not sure if I covered your question. I hope so.
Yes, very much. Thanks a lot. Maybe the students could be the force to bring all this up, and because the professors might be a little bit reluctant or to change. So probably the students, if they start asking for it, or they see it first and then they start asking for it, this could be the way to change it. But thanks a lot.
Very
Thank you.
true. And students will be even older and may have even more of a drive and the self-confidence to demand things, because, maybe if we have this conversation again in 10 years, we won't be referring to them as students, we'll be referring to them as learners, because they'll be 40 and 60 and why not 80 and 90-year-olds. I want to learn when I'm 90. I'd like to learn something new every day.
Thank you.
Konstantinos, if you would like to go ahead with your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Lena, very much. It was a great presentation, incredible new information coming through. And for us that have kids almost getting ready to go to university, is really important to see where things are heading. I was wondering if there's been any research or any thought about how is this new, let's say, era or new developments connect to the job market, because at the end of the day we all go to university, or we all hope that our kids go to university not just to have fun and broaden their horizons, as we say in the application, but actually to get a job at some point. So how does this new way of thinking connect to the job market? Because I assume the employer still looks at the brand. This person is from MIT, he's from Tufts, well, that's great, I'll hire him, or at least I'll interview him. Would that be the same with getting an edX, or somebody saying I've done stackable certificates and now I'm here, and Morgan Stanley, please hire me? So I'm just wondering, is this going to the job market type of approach, has this been considered at all? Thanks.
You're absolutely right. It has been considered. Employers, to a large extent, will still want the brand name. You're absolutely right. It is a very brand centric industry. I think maybe more than Pepsi and Coke industry. So yes, they will, and that's why I say the pace is not going to be as fast, and it's resistant to change. It's one of the major reasons. That's not going to go away from day one. However, things will change, and one of the reasons why I think it'll become a step-by-step lifelong service is exactly because employers are demanding that. Don't forget that up until now, the majority of us, I'm an old hag at the age of 56. I may have had two career changes. My grandma may have had, or my grandpa, no career changes, and our kids are going to have 10, 12, and our grandkids may have 20 or 30 career changes. So as you change career more often, you're going to have to reskill more often to do the new job. This is something that's already happening. So in order to change careers more often, you will need to take additional courses. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to go straight from a Bachelor of Science or Arts that we used to do straight to just, little ed units. It could be that we're going to have our bachelor's, and then in addition to that, get another educational unit and another micro certificate and another, I don't know what, later on. But I think that the more we change jobs, and it's clear that we're going to change career path many times, the younger generation will, we're going to need many more additional educational units. The other part to your question about companies could be that some companies are going to start providing information that is pertinent to them. Right now, we think of education providers and we only think of colleges and universities, but in the future, it could be Google, it could be Amazon, it could be a company ABCD that doesn't exist right now that could be providing that education. And then when they are hiring, they and their competitors will be looking a lot more closely to that brand name, which would be more relevant. Mrs. Agapalido had a question, I think.
Yeah.
I have also a question.
Of course, George.
Hi. Thank you so much. It was really interesting to hear all of this information from the point of view of the university and of the future, because that's how I interpreted it. But what is close to our heart right now, and I'm speaking from the point of view of a college counselor, is the danger we sometimes see in the word diversity. And you've probably heard this worry, this concern before, but I do want to hear more. We have the sense that European students, European counselors, therefore, or counselors working in European countries and in European schools, are being hit by the drive for diversity, because European students are not included really in the diversity that universities are looking for. How is that going to be somehow balanced? Because we think of race, we think of religion, we think of social class, the economic condition of a situation of a family. Europe is somehow bunched together with North America, the white North America. Mm-hmm. How should we be preparing ourselves for a more difficult future for our applicants? If you have any questions.
Thank you for your comment. It is true. That's exactly the way it is. We are not perceived as Europeans to be part in a way of that diversity in the way that you put it. However, diversity is a much broader spectrum. It's not just ethnic background. Diversity can be anything from special needs, sexual orientation or preferences, race, religion, creed, anything. And that could include a lot of Europeans too. So in that sense, we would be included. But to the best of my knowledge, we are not trying in any way, shape, or form to impose Europeans on the student mix. We'll just anybody who wants to get into a university right now will have to be even better. It doesn't matter if they're from Greece or from Timbuktu or from Sri Lanka, they'll just have to try even harder. There is a trend towards trying to get, maybe now with the new administration in the US, some international students, because international students pay a lot more than domestic students. So they know that if they get international students, they're going to get more money. And there are very, very few need blind institutions to international students. There are 3 or 4, just a handful. While for Americans, there are many. But it's not limited to Europeans. And the big influx is primarily China and India. Those are the 2 big sources. And there are other countries like Korea and so on and so forth. But the China and India are the 2 biggest. And I do not see that trend being mitigated. I think that trend is going to continue, quite frankly. So whoever wants to enter, they'll just have to be the best student. It's getting more and more competitive.
So Lena, I have a question for you. I was wondering if you have heard about income sharing universities, and if that's a new trend. I've heard of a couple in the United States that don't charge for tuition, but take a percentage of your income for the first working years. I was wondering if you have heard of that.
Yes, it's something that we have actually discussed with another institution, and it doesn't seem to be picking up as much. I know that it has been discussed also within some people at Tufts. There's no guarantee, actually, that once they graduate, they will be able to repay the loans. So that's something that you would want to steer away. And then the university will be not very confident and likely to go and chase after its own alumni and its own graduates. It's not something that they would want to do. It would bring them in a very difficult position. And, you know, student debt in the United States is so great that they're going to try to find other ways of subsidizing education. Let me just throw out a number. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before. Student debt in the US is 1.7 trillion. It's huge. Do you know what the global spend on education was 2 years ago? It's the last number that we have. It was 10.7 trillion. That's the whole planet. So debt in one country, the US, is the same as the whole education market, you know, in the whole world. It is not sustainable. You have 43 million Americans owing more than $40,000 or pop just for their student education. It's not sustainable. 56% of Brits say that the value of education is not greater than the money you pay as tuition. So something has to give. What more and more universities I will consider doing is, as I said before, subsidize education. How do you subsidize education? When the student actually applies and you accept them, instead of sending them a letter saying that, oh, congratulations, you've been accepted, you can say, oh, congratulations, you've been accepted, and here's a $10,000 scholarship. That's a way of subsidizing. But then you have to try to help them come so that they don't have to pay afterwards. But that means that you have to pop up all your fundraising activities.
And I have one more, Lena. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation a statistic of 25% universities might close, if I understood it
John
correctly.
Croker, the president of Reed College, that was saying that. I don't believe it'll be that high. Yes.
Do you think we are going to see universities go belly up?
I think there will be some, yes. I think there will be some. Not everybody has an endowment. I mean, Tufts Brighter World just passed the 1 billion mark this summer, which I think is wonderful. And during COVID, the finish line is 1.5. That just passed 1 billion, which I think is absolutely wonderful. But not everybody is well endowed. And there are also many state universities. State universities also have very high expenses. They may be lower than other private colleges, and they have a lot of subsidies coming from the states. subsidies. So when the subsidies are actually going to diminish, and they have diminished very significantly during the Trump administration, and they will diminish even more, because right now there's so much money that needs to be pumped into the economy and to the prevention and curing of the COVID situation. I think that many institutions, primarily maybe the state institutions, will go under. But I don't foresee it will be anywhere close to what John Kruger says. But on the other hand, I'm just me, and John Kruger was a president of a big college, so he may know better.
Thank you.
I think we have one final question from, I see Mr. Alexis raising his hand.
Mr. Papalexopoulou. Hello, sir.
Oh,
You're muted. Alexis, you're muted.
Right, this is a mistake I make often. Anyway, Lena, this was
I
a
make
brilliant.
more important ones.
This was a brilliant presentation, and thank you very, very much. It's really the latest in educational thought that you have presented us here. I wanted to take you a bit to the Greek scene. I know you're focusing on U.S. I'm actually speaking to you from the U.S. right now. But I wanted to ask you whether you thought that the new methodologies, the new ideas give Greece a chance to leapfrog over its problems in public education. I'm thinking, for example, let me take you to a parallel. There were places in Greece where there were no telephones 20 years ago. And then all of a sudden we went from no telephones to fiber optics. We see today that we have the latest in digital certification of things in Greece, whereas before we had to wait in line forever. You know, we never went through that middle phase. Do you think that we can use what you have described in your lecture to leapfrog over some of the problems we have in the Greek educational system? I don't know if I'm making myself understood, but basically I want to see whether we have an opportunity here as a country from what you said.
I think that is also a very, very good question. Yes, in some instances, I believe that we do. This presentation was centered around more the OECD or the Anglo world. But yes, there are some opportunities. Now, Greece is plagued with educational problems in the center, but there is some, very good material and some very good educators within the educational system. And the current Minister of Education, I think, is doing a lot to try to overcome some of the huge difficulties. And she has succeeded in many things, but there's still clearly a lot more to do. Some of the issues that we have in the Greek educational system is that we're set up differently. There are several issues that are legal, because we're not allowed to have private universities run, as you know, the Article 106 of the Constitution, but also of the way that classes are being administered. However, I think that actually there could be an opportunity, both in terms of reaching students that are outside Greece, because if you're actually offering courses virtually, you can try to enroll students from all over the globe. You can definitely offer some courses, not just on Hellenic studies, as we normally do, and the Greek language, but even other courses where we have an area of expertise, and there are several of these. So that is one opportunity. The other one is a bit more risque, and that would be to try to provide courses not as a university, but from an entity and an institution, create an academic institution that would not have the legal limitations of universities that can sell educational units to others. And that is something that could be extremely interesting, very, very difficult to do. And there, the big question becomes, how do you promote that, and how do you lend credibility to that effort so that other people can buy it? But I love the way you're thinking. I really do.
So I see we are slowly reaching we've passed the 8 o'clock mark, and I know that other people have more meetings to go to and other events. So I wanted to say a huge thank you to Lena for sharing your time with us and for such a fascinating presentation that I know will definitely lead a lot of food for thought for all of us to think about. Thank you everyone for joining us from wherever in the world you are, and I hope that very soon we can all be together again in person.
I would love that, and I'd like to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to share these thoughts. For the organizers for organizing this, and from Jabari back at Tufts, who's helping us with all the supports of this. And if anybody has any more questions or wants to be in touch to discuss anything further, George and Evgenia, please feel free to pass on my email. I'll be very happy to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.